And somehow worse. She was angry. She was lonely. And she had kept both bottled up for far too long. Her husband, Josiah, spent every hour with scripture in his hands. He prayed before sunrise. He studied until after midnight. He visited the sick. He counseled broken families. He served the town with a gentle heart. But somewhere in all that duty, he forgot the woman sharing his roof. More than a year had passed since he last reached for her hand. More than a year since he looked at her as anything more than part of his ministry. The parsonage felt small in the summer heat. Wood walls sweating in the sun, floorboards creaking like tired bones. Mary often sat by the window just to feel a breeze. And most days she convinced herself she was fine, that a good woman could live on duty alone. That marriage was meant to be patient and quiet. But on this morning, her heart felt louder than her thoughts. She leaned on the window frame, trying to calm the swirl inside her chest. That was when she saw a rider coming down the dirt road, a tall man on a chestnut horse, slow, easy posture, hat tilted low. He wiped the sweat from his neck, and the sunlight caught his shoulders with a shine that made her breath hitch for just a second. It was Elias Boone, a rancher who lived a few miles south of town. 48 years old, weathered by sun and years of hard work, strong in the kind of quiet way men of the frontier carried themselves, he stopped to check the cinch on his saddle. Mary watched longer than she meant to. She felt her cheeks warm, and she laughed under her breath at her own foolishness. She didn't mean to call out, but a small, playful comment slipped past her lips. Elias looked up, gave a slow, easy smile, and tipped his hat. It was nothing more than a friendly exchange on a hot Texas morning. But for Mary, something shifted, something she had tried to bury under a full year of silence. She stepped back from the window, her heart beating too fast. And for the first time, she wondered if a single glance can shake a woman this much. What happens when life gives her more than a glance? Mary could not get that moment out of her head. The sunlight on Elia, the easy smile, the way one simple greeting felt warmer than a dozen quiet dinners with her husband. She tried to shake it off, told herself it was nothing but a silly thought from a lonely morning. But sometimes the thoughts you call silly are the ones that stay the longest. For the next few days, she found herself glancing toward the road more than usual, listening for the sound of a horse passing, pretending she was just checking the weather or the laundry on the line. But deep down, she knew what she was waiting for, and it scared her a little. Not because she wanted anything improper, but because the tiniest spark can feel like a fire when your heart has been cold for too long. Josiah didn't notice. He rarely noticed anything outside his sermons. He spoke of duty at breakfast. He spoke of faith at supper. He prayed long after she fell asleep. And Mary tried to remind herself that he was a good man, just not a man who knew how to love a young wife who still wanted laughter in her days. One evening, the heat settled thick over San Angelo. So thick you could almost taste the dust in the air. Josiah stepped into the kitchen and told her he needed to travel to Abilene for a few days. Some meeting of pastors, some church matter that required his presence. He packed before dawn, gave her a gentle nod instead of a kiss, and rode off into the rising sun. The first night alone felt strange, quiet in a way she didn't expect. Every creak of the house sounded louder. Every gust of wind against the window made her heart jump. Still, she tried to calm herself by reading scripture, by boiling tea, by telling her nerves to behave. Then came the noise, a hard thump against the back door, followed by the sound of boots on wooden flooring. Mary froze where she stood, her breath caught in her chest. The parsonage held the church offerings for the week. Enough money to tempt the wrong kind of man. And now she was alone in a house that suddenly felt much too big. The footsteps moved closer, slow, confident, the kind of walk that belonged to someone who believed no one could stop him. Mary reached for the nearest lamp, her hands shaking, her heartbeat loud enough to drown out the cicadas outside. She whispered one prayer under her breath. Not for miracles, not for angels, just for someone to hear her if she screamed. But she had no idea who was about to answer that prayer. And she had no idea how much that moment would change the rest of her life. Mary didn't breathe. She stood inside the dim parsonage with her back pressed to the wall. The boots on the floor grew louder. Slow steps, heavy steps. The kind of steps that told you the man walking them didn't fear anything in this world. A tall shadow moved across the narrow hallway. Mary held her lamp tighter. For a second, she thought about running. But there was nowhere to go, nowhere to hide. and the church money sat inside the study like a target painted bright as day. The door swung open, and the intruder stepped into the room. His face was hard. His eyes were sharper than the knife on his belt. He didn't say a word. He just pointed toward the study. Mary backed away, her voice stuck in her throat. The lamp shook in her hand. He grabbed her arm and shoved her aside. Enough to send her stumbling, but not enough to knock her down. He wanted the money. Nothing more, nothing less. Mary tried to shout for help, but fear held her voice hostage. The man kicked open the study door. Coins spilled from a half-open box. Then something outside changed. A new sound cut through the night. Hoof beats on dirt. Footsteps on the front porch. A man clearing his throat as if deciding whether to knock. Earlier that week, Elias had promised Josiah he would stop by with an old Bible he had borrowed and a little extra money for the church building fund. So that night, instead of riding straight home, he turned his horse toward the parsonage. As he reached the gate, he heard it. A bang inside the house. A crash that didn't sound like a man dropping a book. Something was wrong in a place that was supposed to be quiet. He knew trouble when he heard it. So he stepped off his horse and walked toward the door. Slow, careful. Like a man who had faced danger so many times he could almost smell it in the air. Inside, the intruder turned fast. Mary saw worry flicker on his face. Not guilt, just fear of being caught. He grabbed the box of coins and made for the back door. But he didn't get far because Elias burst through the front like a storm. He saw Mary, saw the mess, saw the stranger running, and that was all he needed. He tackled the man before he reached the steps. From the doorway, Mary finally found her voice and cried out, "Please hurry." The two of them crashed into the dirt, fists flying, boots kicking, dust rising like smoke in the summer heat. Mary watched from the doorway, heart pounding, lamp shaking, whispering prayers she didn't even remember learning. Elias hit the intruder one last time, and the man scrambled up, holding his side, stumbling toward the trees. He dropped the stolen coins as he ran, leaving Elias breathing hard in the yard. He looked at Mary, not with anger, not with pity, just concern. A quiet, steady concern that made her knees weak. What happens next between these two souls alone in the night is something you might want to hear. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing. And while you are here, pour yourself a cup of tea and tell me what time it is and where you were listening from. Mary stood frozen in the doorway, the lamp still trembling in her hand, the night air buzzing around her like it could not decide if it wanted to cool her or chill her to the bone. Elias brushed dirt from his shirt and stepped closer. Not too close, just near enough for her to feel safer than she had felt in a long time. He picked up the scattered coins and handed them to her. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "You should sit down. You took quite a scare." Mary nodded, but her knees felt unsteady. Elias reached out as if to steady her, then stopped himself. His hand hovered a few inches from her arm. A simple gesture, but it made her heart thump hard against her ribs. She turned and walked inside. He followed, not as a man entering a home, more like someone making sure the danger was truly gone. The study was a mess. Drawers open, papers scattered across the floor. The chair knocked over in the struggle. Mary stared at it all and felt something inside her crack just a little. Not from fear, not from pain, but from the weight of being alone through so much for so long. Elias noticed the goosebumps on her arms. Even though the night was warm, he reached for the blanket on the back of the sofa and draped it around her shoulders. She whispered a soft thank you, her voice shaking more than she wished it would. There was a long, quiet moment, the kind that makes time feel slower, the kind that lets two people hear things they normally pretend not to feel. Elias rubbed the back of his neck. He looked at her the way a man looks when he wants to say something but knows he should not. Mary stared at the floor, her breath uneven, her hands gripping the blanket like she needed something to hold on to. Finally, she looked up, her eyes shining with a mix of leftover fear and something deeper. Elias took one small step toward her. She reached for him without thinking, fingers clutching the front of his shirt, pulling him down beside her on the edge of the bed. For a moment, his chest pressed against hers and the blanket slipped, showing more of the bruises the fight had left on her skin. His rough hand hovered at her side over the torn fabric, fingers pausing there as if to steady her and to feel how badly she'd been hurt. For one wild heartbeat, they were too close. His warm skin brushing her bruised shoulder. Fear and gratitude twisting into something dangerously sweet. Then sense crashed back over him, and he pulled away like a man stepping back from a fire he knew could burn them both. And for a second that felt longer than it should, they both forgot the world outside. He caught himself first. He let out a long breath, backed up a little, and said in that low, steady voice of his, "Mary, you have been through enough for one night. You need rest. I will sit outside until morning just in case that fool comes back." She wanted to tell him something honest, something brave, but the words stayed inside her. Elias walked to the porch. The boards creaked under his boots. Mary watched his shadow settle on the steps, strong, quiet, faithful in a way her heart had not felt from anyone in a very long time. But she had no idea that the hardest part was still ahead, and she had no idea what dawn would bring between them. Morning came slow over the Texas plains, the kind of slow light that makes you wonder what the night changed while you slept. Mary stepped onto the porch and found Elias still sitting where he promised, back straight, pat low, watching the road like a man born to guard something precious. He stood when he saw her. "You all right?" She nodded, but the truth was complicated. The warmth she felt toward him after everything that happened lingered inside her like a quiet fire. Not loud, not wild, just steady. For the next few days, the parsonage felt different. The silence inside it no longer felt peaceful. It felt like a reminder of how much she had lived without, and a reminder of the man who had stepped into danger for her without a second thought. When Josiah returned from Abilene, he walked through the door smiling. He stopped when he saw the bruises on her arms. He dropped his coat when she told him about the break-in. He listened with both hands gripping the table, and he whispered a prayer for her safety. But then Mary told him the rest. Not the spark, not the unspoken feelings, just the truth about how long she had been lonely, how long she had carried more silence than a young wife should ever carry. Josiah was quiet for a long time. His eyes stayed on the table. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough around the edges. "Mary, a marriage should not feel like a burden God placed on only one pair of shoulders. I have failed you as a husband. If you choose to leave this house, I will tell the church that the fault is mine, even if it cost me my place behind that pulpit." There was no anger in his voice, only sorrow for a life that had drifted without either of them noticing. He knew the town would talk. He knew the elders of the church would question him. Still, he agreed to a quiet separation and promised to stand in front of every whisper so it would fall on him and not on her. For a while, nothing seemed to change on the surface. Mary stayed in the guest room while Josiah met with the church elders. Whispers spread through San Angelo like dust on the wind. Some folks stopped nodding to her on the street. One storekeeper refused to take her money at all. Elias heard the talk in town, and more than once he had to stare down a man who hinted that Mary had been keeping company with him long before the separation. On one hard afternoon, he even stepped between her name and a loud mouth at the saloon, making it clear that anyone who spoke against her would answer to him. After a few long months, the church called a new pastor, and Josiah quietly moved to serve in another small town to the east. Only then did Mary pack a small travel bag and ride south to Elias' ranch. Elias stepped out of the barn when he saw her riding in, and the look on his face held every answer she'd been searching for. They married at the small church on the edge of town. The pews were mostly empty. A few ranch hands of Elias stood in the